Sunday gathering aside, is what you're doing in the church training and equipping and discipling people to make more disciples? You got to move from hanging out to discipleship. Some guy's life radically changed because 3 guys dared to have coffee together every week with him. So that's why I'm excited to talk about discipleship. Are we crushing it? No. But are we awakening to the reality that we can invest in the idea of discipleship? Yes.
All right, Gannon, thank you so much for joining me as we engage in this topic about better discipleship.
Okay.
And I wanted to pick your brains, but first, let me just get a quick intro. Remind us who you are, what are you doing now, and in your like elevator pitch, what has been your journey with discipleship as we get into the conversation.
Sure. I'm Gannon Sims. I'm a founding director at Fresh Expressions North America, which is a mission movement that helps churches and denominations think outside the box and develop discipling communities and micro churches among those that the kind of typical church experiences are not reaching. So that's one hat that I've worn for 13 years now. And about 2 years ago, I moved from Fredericksburg, Virginia, where we were doing campus ministry and we were kind of planting house churches in Fredericksburg. I moved 2 years ago to Dallas, Texas, to become the senior pastor of a 125-year-old church in an urban neighborhood that sits on 2 city blocks. So I've done the micro church with very low overhead, and now I'm doing a traditional church with more overhead that has a long history, though, of mission and innovation. This church has been faithful and creative for a long time. So, but it's kind of fun to have just the ability to experience both of those things, because I think often folks in church planting movements or micro church movements aren't in conversation with pastors of, quote, tall steeple historic places. So
Yeah.
I like to bridge those two things. And what I say is tradition and innovation. How do those two things walk together? So that's me in a nutshell. Married to Carrie. Carrie is a trained theological mind and has been involved in some of the stuff with ordinary movements as well. So it's good to be here.
Wonderful. Oh man, great to have you. And I do think it's great that you get to have already been in the space you were in, but then going to a totally different traditional and now trying to figure out how to work within that context. There's just different challenges than like starting new versus starting with something that's old and
Correct.
established and helping them go somewhere new. Totally different.
Yeah.
So Gannon, let's talk about the state of discipleship. And if you were to give me an overview of where we are today, and are we as the church are we crushing it at discipleship? Let me hear your thoughts.
Are we crushing it at discipleship? No. But I think people are becoming more aware of the fact that it's necessary. The way of Jesus, following the way of Jesus. I define discipleship as be with me, being with Jesus. And for so long, we relied on programs, stadium gatherings, corporately branded books and events. Come and see big thing, when Jesus just invites us into his life. And so how do we take the way of Jesus, who spent most of his time with 12 people, and then there's some broader circles outside of that 12 people, and do the deep work? And I think that's part of what could be a new Reformation. So that's why I'm excited to talk about discipleship. Are we crushing it? No. But are we awakening to the reality that we can invest in the idea of discipleship? Yes.
So I talk to people, and when what I found is like I'm in my my sub circles or like my community, like people are talking about discipleship,
Yeah.
and then I talk to other people, and they look at me like I'm like something's wrong with me. Like, why am I bringing up trouble? Or what the
Mm.
heck are you talking about? Why is this even a topic? So like, what is the writing on the wall that for you is the like clearly we're not winning at discipleship? Because I think people are just I know that there are so many people that are so happy and content with what they're doing on Sundays, and even pastors who are happy and content with what is happening on Sundays. And yet, I also know from the data that I study and lived experience, anecdotally, that there's a big contrast. How would you lay this out to somebody who's unaware of this?
Well, there was a years ago an Australian bishop of the Anglican Church who said more of the same means less of the same. So we see all the statistics, church decline. We're at about 16 to 20% church attendance in the United States. We're seeing more and more people who have zero religious memory or religious experience. Um, I think Gen Z uh, is a there's a huge opportunity for re-evangelization among Gen Z. They're going to break in two ways. They're going to break in a completely non-religious, almost neo-pagan sense. But then I think we're going to see another half of that generation really live into a more robust faith than we've seen in a long time. So the time is now. Let's get excited and go on adventure with Jesus together.
What do you think it looks like? And if I mean you're in a traditional setting now,
Yep.
what's if you were to kind of vision cast for what that looks like going from because traditional can still win at discipleship. It's not like you have to do all or nothing. I'm
Right.
kind of curious as to what does it look like in your ideal vision to see traditional churches shift into being disciple making churches.
Yeah. So I always, again, I say I like tradition and innovation. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like there are certain things because this is my edict to all pastors of churches. So much in life has changed. Everything for people has changed except the church. Like they want to come to church and know what it is that they're walking into. So be gentle with your people. Let them walk in and feel the warmth of that environment and that place. Alongside that is where the growth happens. So Jesus was working, always ministering on the margins. So how are you working with the people on the margins of your congregation? Kate Bowler wrote a book that I haven't read, but I love the title. And the title is The Lives We Actually Have. So how are we going on mission with the lives we actually have? So that's my discipleship. If I were to have a discipleship strategy in this more historic or traditional context, it's that. How are we unleashing our people to go on mission with the lives they actually have? That I see a collective deep breath across the congregation when I use those words. Our tagline for many years at Cliff Temple Baptist Church, where I'm the pastor, has been building everyday people into everyday missionaries for Jesus Christ. And for some, that's overwhelming because they're like, I'm not a missionary. I can't do that. I'm not ordinary. Well, of course you can. What do you like to do? Do that really well and share it with other people. Do you have a home? Do you have a workplace? Do you have a table? Do you have a neighborhood? Do you have a sidewalk that you like to walk down? Where are you naturally? And then how do we invite you to be listening and praying, paying attention to those things right around you, which has to start with yourself. I think there are a lot of pastors and leaders out there who want to create some sort of big program. And it's like, no, actually, it's like, worry about yourself. Um, do you feel loved? Do you feel loved by Jesus? Are you working to earn his favor somehow? And so when we learn to receive his love and then be engaged in an ongoing giving back to God, receiving from God in love, then we're primed to give and receive love to other people. And we can sort of, walk through how that looks with others in our neighborhood. So discipleship in that vein means how am I unleashing people to go and be where they are, and then we come back and we talk about it. So here I've got a group of about, and this is just brand new off the shelf, but it's something I've been working on for a couple of years. We've got about 15 to 18 people in our congregation that are already doing stuff that is mission or can very easily be mission driven. Well, and I'm talking cycling groups, running groups, home groups. We've got a vibrant arts ministry here. So unleash them, do that, send them out to ask good questions and just be alongside those communities. And then I love Zoom. So convene them on Zoom, create some community, build fellowship, ask some questions, make sure they're taken care of and they're growing in their faith. And then we, go back out to the field and do the stuff, come back and talk about it. Jesus had that strategy. Go, and then come back and let's talk about it. And let's make sure we're rested and delighting in the Lord in the meantime. So it's this stuff, discipleship is transferable. Doesn't matter what kind of church, how big, how small. Strobe lights or organ hymn books, doesn't matter. Because there's people that need to learn how to give and receive love.
So I hear you saying that you're not trying to all of a sudden shift and change everything about the Sunday service.
Absolutely not.
But you're very concerned about what's happening now in addition to and outside of the Sunday service.
Yep.
And being intentional about already looking for the areas where you maybe you already have people who are in some spaces situationally already strategically placed or doing the right things that just needed a little bit more win in their sales or even to be celebrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they need to hear, like in releasing disciple-making movements, you've got to have three things. And we say this in Fresh Expressions. We've got to have permission givers and supporters and folks who can sort of be alongside. So permission givers are really key because they've got to know, these people who are, say, doing the running groups or cycling groups, that sort of thing, they've got to know that what they're doing matters. And that is sort of, not that people are looking for an endorsement, but, for me to say to Arnulfo and Michael, who are doing a cycling group every Saturday morning, for me to be like, guys, that's amazing. Let's keep talking about that, because sooner or later there's going to be a spiritual question that comes up. That Michael and Arnulfo are already equipped, because I know those guys. They're equipped to answer those questions. But how do we grow that into a discipling community? Or there's maybe a subset of that cycle group that then end up at coffee after cycling, and they're having a more spiritual conversation. That turns into something that looks like an OM group or whatever. So on the margins is where the magic happens. But they need permission, and then they need the right support. I always say, if you're going to do something for others that are outside the church, you can't do it alone. You've got to do it with at least one or two other people.
That's so. I've really been thinking about this a lot. Having been a small groups pastor and having wanted to cater a different group for everybody in the church, that nobody would have any excuse for not having a reason to be involved. But then feeling like we have so many groups, so many things, so many events, so many programs, right. Prayer night, Sunday service, that at some point, I think people feel bad for not being at church or being in church. And then, 20, 30 years later, people like myself, like the only community you really have is in church, and the only things you have going on are church things. Mm-hmm. to where it's like you're so disconnected from people outside the church. So I think when you talk about the permission piece, you're saying some of this is just from church leadership.
Yeah.
We need to give people permission to go and do non-churchy looking things.
Yes.
To reconnect with unchurched people, so that there's opportunity for like not forced, but just spiritual conversations to happen.
Yep. So we've got I see my chief role as a pastor of a church as the equipper of the saints for the work of ministry. So the gift of the pandemic should have been a complete audit of everything we do in the life of the church. Every program, every group, every service. This church went through a bit of trauma, as every church did during the pandemic, but they went through a pastoral transition in the pandemic. So their pastor moved to a new church in November of 2020, left the church for 16 months without a pastor. So it just meant a lot of things just went away. And then they waited for the new person before, bringing some of these things back. So we just didn't bring some things back.
Yeah.
And we allowed some room. And, between the pandemic and between just the charism that this particular congregation has, and I can't ever overemphasize the importance of context. There are context clues in every situation. So what works in my church might not work in your church. But the context here is innovative and more nimble and pliable than a lot of historic churches that I've seen. And a lot of, or even historicity aside, like just established church. So if your church has been around for 10 years and you've got a building, you're an established church. And there may be more flexibility in this 125-year-old church in Dallas, Texas than there is in a 10-year-old church down the street.
Yeah, depends on that culture that was formed by
absolutely.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you do have to say no to some things and recognize that if people aren't coming to your thing and your program, then start. And I get this from Todd Bolsinger. He wrote a great book called Canoeing the Mountains. But Bolsinger's big thing, and Fresh Expressions too, is like we just got to listen. Go out there and listen and ask people what they need. Ask your church people, what do you need to be healthy? We're hearing from our people, I need an hour to reset, to recharge, to be quiet. So some of our church program in the fall is going to be like hours where people can have resets. They come up to the church not for content, but for experiences. That then give them some tools or the chance to catch their breath so they can be on mission every day. And we're going to do the content piece on the podcast. So we have a podcast that is designed to be discipleship on the go. Listen to the podcast, come up to the church, and we're going to create an experience for you. Because the last thing people need is another person talking to them. They can do that in their car. I hate to say that as a preacher. I mean, I'm not going to.
No, it's so true.
Yeah.
2024 game has changed.
Yeah, and I mean, you can listen. I'm not, you can listen to any preacher you want. Yes, and I love, rightly ordering the Word of God, and it's an art form for me to get to preach. But you can listen to any preacher. But you can't, and AI cannot do this. No machine can do this. No machine can convene people for prayer, for care, for love, for the kind of stuff that the church, the family of God, is designed to do.
It's good. So we started talking. Well, I don't want to say we talked, but you sent me some screenshots, and I have your book at home, and I think it'd be a good time to elaborate on this vision. And I don't know if there's so much vision as much as call back to. Mm-hmm. But maybe elaborate on this discipleship, and how you're wanting people to rethink discipleship at home.
Yeah, so I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Bringing Church Home, how the family of God makes us a little more human. And it was published by Seedbed, which was birthed by Asbury Seminary. And, the crazy thing is, in our American programmatic church experience, where we tried to make, small groups and care groups and home groups and all these things, we forgot that the original group designed by God was the family. He designed the group. We don't have to go out and reinvent the group. It's already there, baked into the DNA of the human experience. If you've got a belly button, you come from somewhere. You are not self-originating. Mm-hmm. And so you were born into a group. Now, those groups are broken, fractured. There's lots of pain associated with that group called family. But Jesus, in his ministry among us, and this interaction is recorded in 3 of the 4 Gospels, and Jesus is teaching in his house, and the folks in the room say, "Hey, Jesus, your mom's looking for you. Your mother, your brothers, they're looking for you." And Jesus says, "Who are my mother and my brother and my sister? But whoever does the will of God is my mother, my brothers, my sister." So Jesus, in that statement, constitutes the family around himself, but he didn't throw the family out. So I think the challenge there is for all of us to see our families as reconstituted around Jesus, with room to welcome in the lost, the lonely, the broken, the widow, the single person, whoever it is, into our family life. So how does the family really become the vehicle for discipleship?
Yeah.
For evangelism? And again, that doesn't start by saying, "Okay, great, now I know this, I'm going to make my family into some perfect, case for discipleship." No. Get yourself right. Get your house in order. Learn to give and receive love from Jesus, first with you, then with your family, and just then know, hey, who are we paying attention to out there? Who needs a meal? Oh, who's a kid down the street that needs some love? And I mean, there's something so beautiful, Alex, in the small. That's why Jesus talked about mustard seeds and yeast and pearls. So the audacity to think small and to say, that's where the life is. Right there at conception, the small.
So you'd say there's this idea strategically. It's going to sound over like it's just, but it's the idea that we need to simplify. Doesn't even have to be curriculum, program. It's not even like tight structure of deadlines and start times and end times. It's just this, we need to help people figure out how to do mission on, with family, how to just do life with people and opening our homes and becoming accessible.
Yes.
And then we're just artfully, tactfully allowing conversation that's gonna orient towards Jesus to take place as we bring people with us.
Yeah. And if we're people of the resurrection, he's given them the mission and the ministry to us. So there's a power at work within each one of us who are baptized followers of Jesus. And that power it's like the Holy Spirit's just dying to release that power in all of us. And so, if you're listening to this podcast, you're a pioneer of the faith, and you have permission by God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, by the triune community, to go be a community wherever you are. And
now,
yeah.
So I think my experience would tell me that if I were to suggest this to leaders, they would say, well, people can do that anytime. They're already doing that. We're not telling anyone they can't do that. They would just kind of almost, I think I would get pushback from leaders who are saying, well, that's already, anybody can do that at any time. Why would we need to even talk about that? I feel like people don't see that as something novel, or they see that, or they would see that as something that is already being done. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on to the leaders who would maybe be thinking like, well, my people are, my church, my leaders, the people in our church are already like, that's already, they can do that anytime they want to. Why do we even need to make an emphasis about that? Or why do we need to cut back from things so that they can do that? Like they can already do that on the nights that we don't have church programs.
Yeah. So I would wonder what level of intention is happening when people are already doing whatever it is that they're doing. Is this, just, are people just hanging out talking about sports? Nothing wrong with that, but is there intention around the possibility that discipleship or spiritual community would be forming outside the walls of the church with people who are not yet part of the church? So that'd be my question. Yeah. And if all these things are already happening, how are you celebrating those things and telling those stories in the church so that they're replicating? And if you're not allowing enough room for those things to flourish and grow, then you got to kind of rethink. Like, is what you're doing, Sunday gathering aside, is what you're doing in the church training and equipping and discipling people to make more disciples, or are you training and equipping them to come and sit and serve in a fairly conventional way? I mean, I'm not knocking the people who that work in the parking lot parking cars on a Sunday morning, or hand out bulletins, or on a security team in a church. But you've got people in the church that have immense capacity and gifts that they kind of have to like leave at the door of the church. And the church isn't often interested in. But man, if you've got a business owner in the church, I want to know about it, And if you got teachers, if you got people with land or whatever it is, I want to know what do you have that you're bringing to Jesus that is a real clue to your calling as a Christian. That then we can take whatever that gift is and work with you to figure out how that's a platform to make disciples and be on mission.
Hey, friend, we're going to jump right back into this discussion about discipleship and disciple making. But before we jump in, let me just highlight ordinarymovement.com, because that is the reason that I have been able to provide this podcast in the first place. There's this whole community and a movement of disciple making where we've basically taken this entire process of discipleship. We've distilled it into a group model, taking people through 26 sessions. We have a men's track, a women's track, and we have a track that can fit in just for men and women together. It fits into church structures with small groups. It also fits into a person's daily life, where even if they've never even been in a small group and their churches don't have small groups, they don't even know where to begin. It is for the local church and meant to be done with and through your local church, but it is also designed for ordinary men and ordinary women. And it was designed by ordinary men and ordinary women. And so anyone, be a roofer, an entrepreneur, a business person, a stay-at-home mom, a waiter, whatever level of education you have or don't have, it doesn't matter. We've taken all the guesswork out of how do you bring together people and learn how to follow Jesus together in a high challenge, high grace environment that helps people become disciples who make disciples. And it's all available to you. Check it out at ordinarymovement.com. All right, back to the show. So it's almost like you're really cut the kind of the program, the event mentality. You're saying, hey, let's pull back a little bit. Let's really help people to strategically think how to be intentional through their home and their family and their communities at bringing people together for time and space to connect. But you're going to be challenging them to tactfully bring conversations that come back to spiritual conversations that lead to discipling conversations and there's this, it's not just like you're casting vision for it and hoping it happens. As a leader, you'd be really intentionally vision casting and then even bringing back people together to say, how's this going?
Yes.
And sharing
absolutely.
Stories.
Yeah.
Like this is a mission.
Yes.
And you're just trying to do it in such a way to where it still has this organic grassroots culture to it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But you have to calm together and And again, how, like, what did you learn by listening? What questions did you ask? What surprised you? People who are on the streets will tell you all sorts of things you think you know, but you don't. And the church makes all sorts of assumptions about what's going on out there that aren't true. We did a series of listening exercises going out and learning our community. And we were asking a very basic question, and it was something like this. If people of faith did something good for the community, what would it be and why? And just the fact that we asked the question was enough for most people. So they said stuff like, just create space where that question can be asked. Create space where people can be heard and listened to, because we feel like there's no space for anything that we have to say. So listen, observe, know what's going on, know what people really think as opposed to what you think they think. And then interpret that through prayer and discernment, through discerning, the wisdom that God's given us. And then we make incremental steps based on that listening and that interpretation. Again, it's organic, but it has to have some kind of form, or it's just going to be, you got to move from hanging out to discipleship. I just don't think it has to look like a workbook. Yeah.
The 8-week study.
Yeah. Not that you can't, I'm about to do a 8-week study with the Pioneer group that I meet with on Zoom. I mean, we're going to do a monthly thing and we do some content. But mostly it's to get the group together to say, hey, God loves you and you're not crazy, and look at all of your friends in the church that are doing the same thing, even though it's not readily apparent on Sunday morning that we're doing the same thing. And we create some space on Sunday morning a couple of times a month to say, maybe hear a testimony from one of these people or a mission partner, something like that. So we're telling that story well for the 80% that are happy to attend a worship service.
Yeah. So let me hear some ideas for some listener. I think you, especially given the context of Fresh Expressions, your local setting too, like, what are some things, what are some practices, what are some approaches that you're seeing people do that seemingly are effective right now that maybe people would be unaware of? And maybe it's something that they could try. Maybe it's something just to get the wheels turning a little bit in ideation.
Yeah. So go right back to what I just shared. It's the right now, listening is novel. Like, there's so much noise, so many opinions, so much polarization. I dare you, go out and just go to McDonald's and talk to the manager. Go to your local whatever restaurant and sit at the bar and find out about the life of the bartender. Ask questions. Listen to what's coming out of their mouth. What do they see in their community? What do they see as a need? What is their opinion of faith? Do they have faith? It's wild what people will tell you if you ask. And then take that learning to prayer. Take that back to your church leaders. And you might be surprised by what God opens up in your neighborhood just based on what you're hearing from your neighbors around you.
It's good.
It's that's just the key. That's where you got to start.
Okay.
Now, if you also, and this to an earlier point, if receiving love from Jesus is hard for you, if you feel like you've got to, you're constantly having to work to, achieve God's love somehow, how do you let go and receive love and know that you're loved? Because if you don't know that you're loved, you're not going to be able to be the conduit of God's love that you can be. So learn to give and receive, learn to share, and then take that out on your listening and your question asking, and watch God blow your mind.
What are some additional questions that you love to bring up with people when you're sitting down with them and helping them?
Yeah,
maybe in discipleship conversations.
Yeah, so always asking this question's in the book, but it gets back to that posture of giving and receiving love that we learn in the family, that we should then kind of take to, bigger, kind of more non-traditional family groupings. How are you being loved by Jesus, and how are you allowing Jesus to love the world through you? So what's something that happened to you this week where you experienced the love of Jesus, and where did you give the love of Jesus? And just keep that question before people all the time, so they're engaged in a constant conversation with God, with themselves, with other people. So how has Jesus loved you? How has Jesus loved the world through you? So I ask that question a lot. We in Bible study, I love, there's a group called Disciple Making Movements. They came up with a thing called Discovery Bible Method. Lots of people use it. I love it. Just reading a passage of Scripture, asking, what does this passage say about me? What does it say about God? Who do I want to share it with? Taking on a parable from Jesus to memory, taking it to memory, and that's more than just memorizing Scripture and repeating it word for word, but just knowing the story and just looking for ways where that story is just going to come out in natural conversation. Somebody's having a bad day and they've got a storm in their life, and say, what, that reminds me of this guy Jesus who calmed a storm. What would it be like if Jesus could calm the storm in your life? It sounds a little hokey maybe, but but it's just like, I want the language of the parables of Jesus to come out of our mouths just as much as the language of sports metaphors. We all know, we all can recount whatever big game.
Yeah.
But can we recount just the everyday, mundane, wonderful stories of Jesus and how those connect to somebody's sadness or someone's joy?
Yeah. Yeah. Geez, Proverbs are such a relatable place to start for people as they're working, navigating decisions. And, reminds me of this proverb I've been trying to apply to my life.
Yeah. Yeah, something. So, get the word in you. And then allow the Lord to surprise you when, whoa, that flew out of my mouth. We're all surprised when certain things fly out of our mouths. Oh, that we would be surprised when a proverb or, some words of Jesus fly out of our mouth to make meaning in a confusing world.
Let me ask you something. What I see is I see people that are also in churches that there's a lot of people out there that desire deeper discipleship and disciple making in their churches, but their church does not have a culture of disciple making. What do they do?
Yeah, this is where resources like OM are really helpful. So
what's this book that you read also? I know you're giving us a shout out, but I want to make sure you get...
So Ordinary Movement's a great thing. Get involved, join a group. Grab my book, Bringing Church Home, and look at the tips in there, and maybe create a little study group around that. Disciple Making Movements is something that you can find online. There are other little groups that you can get into. There are groups that meet on Zoom, all sorts of things. But I'd leave it to you guys as the curators of the content to help your leaders get people the resources they need, that then they maybe create a culture in their own life, and then maybe 2 or 3 or there's a group of people in a church that have this experience that they can go share with their church leaders. There can be little movements created. But the joy of this stuff, Alex, is that it does not take the pastoral leadership to turn the entire church system into whatever, discipleship tool or strategy. It's just like, what's happening on the margins? How do you bless that? And how do you keep it on the margins until it has enough health that you can then point to it and then say, hey, church, guess what? Somebody's life was radically changed because this happened in my church. Some guy's life radically changed because 3 guys dared to have coffee together every week with him. Baptized in January. Complete person of peace, a person who has this whole network now opened up to the power of the gospel. Because 3 guys had coffee with him every week for 6 months.
I've met pastors or for sure heard of pastors who feel just stuck. There's like church leaders, pastors who are just stuck. They're like, they don't know how to get their church to shift and move. Mm-hmm. So I think what I hear you saying is, especially for these church leaders and environments where the environment is very cold. It's they're coming to do the Sunday service they've always done, the routine. Yep. You're saying really then there's this, like, at some point you just got to do something that's going to be foreign to everybody else. Mm-hmm. Or as a church leader, you got to cast a vision and just see who is interested, and people might look at you, like, what are you talking about? Why would I do something more than Sunday morning? But like, and then you're really talking about this cultivation then of this disciple making movement, not necessarily DMM, but whatever this disciple making movement is that you're creating within your church, and it's on the outskirt. You're able to foster it. It's one person, one group at a time over there, and then your goal is not to shift everybody all at once. I mean, if you can, amazing, but it's probably not practical. No. But to create all of this going on over here, and then you're constantly celebrating it, and then at some point it's inevitable where you're going to feel all of a sudden the flippening, so to speak, where it's like, now this is the expectation, this is the hope, this is the goal, and this is what we're about.
So be courageous enough to experiment on the edges, on the margins of your field. Every pastor in America is stuck. Hopefully he or she will admit it. I think 3 great words in leadership right now are, I don't know. Yeah. Henry Nouwen wrote a wonderful little book, 30 years ago, In the Name of Jesus. He talked about Christian leadership. He's prophetic. He basically said the Christian leader of the future has nothing except their own vulnerable self. So our vulnerability, it's not about our techniques, our education, our skills. Those are all important. Let's celebrate theological education. I think pastors need theological education. I think we need to know how to think theologically and bring a theological imagination to people who are hungry. But we don't know, but God does know. So let's journey with him. Let's place all things in him, in Christ, and let him lead the way. So, I mean, it's a freeing and wonderful time to be a Christian leader if we're courageous enough to say, I don't know, but God does. let's find out.
Yeah, I don't know. Like you mentioned, experiment. And I think I was talking with Brittany, my wife, for anyone listening, about some of the ministry stuff that we want to try maybe this fall, next year, and just I almost want to frame it as we talk to people about it, like as an experiment. I want the freedom to try some disciple making in different ways that don't look like the normal, Sunday morning routine.
Yeah.
And I think as church people, church people come with a lot of expectations, and I think just letting people know that, hey, this is an experiment. Like, this is the goal, but there's a lot of different ways to get to the goal, and it may not work. But so I'm thinking in my own life, but I think as pastors and as church leaders, people, I don't know, I think we need to embrace a little bit more of this experiment mentality of like, hey, we don't know what's going to work best in our community and our demographic with any one given leader. There needs to be room to fail. If you do fail, like it's not a failure if you're learning from it. And if you're trying to share Jesus, like that's never a failure ultimately, as long as we're humble and teachable and then saying, what can we do better next time? Right.
Yep. Yep. And experiment is if you use the word experiment, you see the anxiety level lessen. Just like you say, hey, let's be on mission with the lives we actually have. Oh, really? You mean my life? Okay. Like I don't have to add anything more. No, you don't. Be intentional about what you do. Okay, cool. Then you say experiment. And then the whole church goes, all right, well, it's gotten us a lot more permission and a lot less anxiety to use that word. Safe, modest experiment. I even say small missional experiment. You know, I use those two things interchangeably. And we are in a spirit of experimentation, I think our whole ministry. I think our whole lifetime. Like at Cliff Temple, I know the goal is building everyday people and everyday missionaries for Jesus. Like that's the goal.
Yeah.
And we're going to experiment our way to get there.
Yeah. And the question is how.
Yeah.
You know, and
so you go out there and you exegete the context and you find out and people surprise you. So, you know, we have moms and dads groups for our day school. So stressed out preschool parents are getting together every month for something fun, something social, and then they're also doing some service stuff. Well, some of them are starting to come around church a little bit more. Again, that's just an experiment. It costs $0. Pickleball group, $0. We have an art studio at our church. It's a little, that's contextual to us. That does cost a little bit more money, but our classes fill up with non-believers. And, you know, the cost of clay and paint is negligible to the investment that we're making in their life. It's far less than cameras and production for a Sunday service.
Yeah.
You know, to do some of these little experimental things that make big impacts because we're starting small.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're not talking reckless,
no,
be crazy, send people out with, you know, where it's like they're going to fall on their face and they're going to be embarrassed. This is just, but really testing methods out, missional methods out.
Yeah,
and letting people know we're wanting to evaluate and see what works.
Yeah. So yeah, again, so you got Todd Bolsinger's book, Canoeing the Mountains, his other book, Tempered Resilience, both really good resources, bringing church home for some of these discipleship concepts and just some imaginative longing of my own heart for the church to see the home as seminal in its importance. The first church on the front lines of evangelism. So you already got small groups everywhere. You already got satellite campuses. They're homes. They're already there. They're already getting paid for. You don't have to, church doesn't have to buy them. They're already there. And yeah, the resources that you guys have and use and teaching people how to kind of have this life that is lived up toward God and, you know, inward, both knowing the soul's deepest longing, but also in community. And then that all of our lives would have an outward facing peace. And that we would do that together.
I tend to think I feel like Ordinary Movement, since you brought us up, like I feel like we're a great catalyst within a church to like create a discipling culture within a church where maybe it's like they haven't had a great discipleship culture. They don't like, especially disciple making. It's like, what is that? What do you mean? How do you even get people there? It's like, well, we have this 26 session workbook that helps anyone get there. And not just information acquisition, but actually like we'll help you practice it and learn it while you go, and then you can take it and you can multiply. But then I think there's the, like, once you've done this with some people and you've got this going, then there's the like, well, I think inevitably then you're like, well, hey, how do I get to the unchurched people? How do I, you know, because you can't just only disciple church people all your life, you know?
Right.
And I think that's then where your message with bringing church home, you know, I think is this other beautiful then next step of now we've got to rethink of like, and I've got to take the next scarier, harder step of figuring out how do I engage with the people around me that are not at my church.
Right. And again, with the life you have. So, get the tools, read the books, revel in relationship. And then that's like coming out of these groups, hopefully you come out with some community and some encouragement. You're not doing this alone. But then you're like, okay, so how does every group then challenge each other? Well, okay, what do you like to do? How are you sharing that? How are you coming alongside? How are you doing it with and knowing that there are people not in your church who are going to be smarter about how to reach the culture than you are?
Yeah.
Again, I don't know, but God does, and you might be able to help me. But humble posture, flipping everything on its head, moving from experts to learners, not asking, did it work, but what did we learn? Every time coming back into, like say with our pioneer leaders, like come back on the call or come back to the little group that we're doing and say, what are you learning? Everybody around the horn, what are you learning? Yeah.
And I think even, I mean, you're facilitating that. I would love for anyone listening, I think there's this idea that like, you're not going to figure this out alone. You're not going to like move. You're not going to change the direction of the ship by yourself. Like this is going to end up being a thing that you do as a team, and then teams of teams. And there needs to be this discussion. Like you may have to like find the right people initially that God brings to mind that are going to be into this stuff, or the right leaders or whatever. And then, but I think we're going to see the best results in this trajectory of helping people do this together as a team and almost making like a missions team kind of mindset of just like, hey, let's get together. Let's talk about how this is going. Why is it so hard? What, and just even praying for each other, all of the above.
Yeah, totally.
Gannon, great content, great discussion, great questions, ideas. Thank you for taking time to join me in this discussion about better discipleship.
You're welcome, and thanks for what you're doing to benefit the life of the whole church. Prayers for your work. Thanks.
Likewise. Hey, thank you so much for checking out the show today. I want to invite you to check out the next show. And listen, if you are wanting to learn more about better strategic, thoughtful, intentional discipleship and disciple making, please subscribe, follow us on whatever platform you love to listen or watch on. Please do like, comment, share. Check out ordinarymovement.com for all the resources that we provide in disciple making, discipleship frameworks and pathways and processes that equip everyday, ordinary men and women who want to follow Jesus and be disciples, who make disciples. Finally, I just want to invite you, please drop a comment. Let me know what questions you have. Feel free to give me feedback. I'm growing as a podcast host. I would love to hear from you. That being said, check out the next show, and we'll see you next time.